Good day everyone, welcome to LFX tutorials and welcome to our 100 days JAMB series. If you are joining us for the first time, you are highly welcome, and if you have also been with us, if you are an old member, you are also welcome. Now today we will be considering the topic which says clause. And this clause is a very, how will I put it, is a very crucial topic that has been both in JAMB, WAEC and NECO. And a lot are, when most people, when they see this kind of questions in their exam, they actually mix it up because they don't know they don't know the rules guiding it. So we'll take it one after the other, starting from the definition, moving to the types of clause, then now moving to the types of subordinate clause we have. Now let's start with the definition. What is a clause? A clause is a group of words with a finite verb forming part of a sentence. And what do we mean by finite verb? Finite verb are verbs that have what? That have tenses. Finite verb are verbs that have tenses. I say a clause is a group of words. With finite verb forming part of the word of a sentence. And this finite verb are verb with tenses. That's the definition of a clause. Now let's move on to the types of clause we have. There are two types of clause. We have the main clause and the subordinate clause. The main clause and the what? And the subordinate clause. And when we are talking about a main clause, these are the type of clause that can stand on their own. Example, I am going home now. I am going home now is what? Is a main clause. Then when we are talking about subordinate clause, these are clauses that cannot stand on their own. They only form part of a sentence and they need a main clause for you to make what? A complete thought. Examples of a subordinate clause. Whose house was burgled is an example of what? Of a subordinate clause. And if you look at it very well, if you look at this whose house was burgled very well, it needs what? A main clause for it to what? Make a complete thought. And this subordinate clause has three types. This subordinate clause has three types, which are the noun clause. Subordinate clause has three types, which are the noun clause, the relative clause, which is also known as adjectival clause, and the adverbial clause. So now we'll take these types of subordinate clause one after the other, and I'll be showing you how to identify them whenever you see them. Now let's start with the noun clause. Now, noun clause is a type of clause that acts as a noun in a sentence. Noun clause is a type of clause that acts as what? As a noun in a sentence. And for you to be able to identify this noun clause, there are two things to note. For you to be able to what? Identify this noun clause. One, the first thing to note is that this noun clause, it must start with what? With a subordinate word. This noun clause, for you to be able to identify it, you must take note of two things. One thing to note is that it must start with what? With a subordinate word conjunction. It must start with what? With a subordinate conjunction. And what do we mean by subordinate conjunction? Subordinate conjunction are those type of conjunctions that join a subordinate clause to what? To a main clause. And examples of subordinate conjunctions are, we have because, that, when, as long as soon as, where, and so on, and so on, and so forth. Those are what? Those are examples of what? Of a subordinate conjunction. And I tell you now that to identify a noun clause, it must start with what? With a subordinate what? Conjunction. And the number 2 thing to note for you to know a noun clause, wherever you see it, that noun clause must act as either a subject, object, or complement. That noun clause must act as either a subject, object, or complement. Now let's look at the following. Let's look at these following examples of a noun clause. Let's look at these following examples. 1. That she is awake surprises everyone. Now look at it. That she is awake surprises everyone. That she is awake is what? Is a noun clause in this sentence. And if you look at it very well, that she is awake is acting as what? As the subject of the sentence. And this is our what? Our verb. And this is our what? Object. That she is awake. This whole clause, this noun clause, is acting as what? As the subject in this sentence. And it starts with what? With a subordinating conjunction. Thereby telling us that she is awake is what? Is a noun clause. Is what? Is a noun clause. And for me to say the function of this noun clause, to me now that she is awake functions as what? As subject of the verb surprise. Functions as subject of the verb surprises. That's the function of this noun clause, that she is awake. That's the function it is performing in this sentence. We'll look at this noun clause as performs 6 functions, but we'll get there. Now you can see that she is awake. It acts as what? As the subject of what? Of this sentence. Let's look at another example. Let's look at another example for you to be able to understand it very well. I know that you will come. I'm looking at this sentence very well. This I is our what? Is our subject. This no is our verb. And why that you will come is our what? Our object. Can you see it very well? And you can see that you will come is what? A noun clause. Since it starts with what? A subordinate conjunction. And it acts as what? As the object of this sentence. Thereby making it what? A noun clause. And I told you that how to identify a noun clause, there are 2 things to note. One, it must start with what? A subordinating conjunction. And that noun clause must act as what? As either the subject, object, or complement. Can you now see now that you will come is acting as what? As the object in this sentence. That's how to know what? A noun clause. Now let's move to the functions of what? Of noun clause. Let's move to the functions of what? Of noun clause. Now, noun clause performs the same function as noun and noun phrase. And it performs how many functions? 6 functions. We have subject of the verb. Subject of the verb. Object of the verb. Subject complement. Subject complement. Object complement. Complement of a preposition. Of a preposition. And in apposition to noun. These are the 6 functions of what? Of noun clause. We have the subject of the verb, object of the verb, subject complement, object complement, complement of a preposition and in apposition to a noun. And we are going to take them one after the other. Let's start with subject of the verb. Subject of the verb, it says when the noun clause occupies the initial position in a sentence. When the noun clause occupies the initial position in a sentence. For example, the example I gave earlier, the first example of noun clause I gave earlier, which says that she is awake, surprises everyone. Can you now see that she is awake is what is a noun clause, performing which functions? For subject of what? Of the verb surprises. That's it. That she is awake. That she is awake surprises everyone is a noun clause. That she is awake is what? Is a noun clause. Performing which function? Subject of the verb surprises. Since that she is awake is acting as what? As the subject. And the reason why noun clause has this what? This six function is because noun clause does not modify or qualify anything in a sentence. That's the reason why noun clause performs these six functions. Same thing as noun phrase and noun. The functions of noun, function of noun phrase. The reason why they perform those six functions is because they do not qualify or modify anything in the sentence. Now let's continue. Let's move to object of the verb. Object of the verb. Object of the verb. When the noun clause comes after the verb in the sentence, comes immediately after the verb in the sentence, then it will function as what? Object of the verb. Let's look at this example. The authority awarded what is termed. The authority awarded what is termed punctuality award. And from what is termed punctuality award is what? Is a noun clause. Because it acts as what? As the object in this sentence. Is a noun clause. And it starts with a subordinating conjunction, what? And you can see that it is coming immediately after the what? After the verb. Whereas performing which function? Object of the verb awarded. Object of the what? Of the verb awarded. You can see very simple and very straightforward. When you know the rules, of this noun clause, you'll be able to identify it wherever you see it. And that is very simple. Whereas it starts with the subordinating conjunction and it must act as either a what? A subject, object, and complement. Now let's move to the next function, which is what? Subject complement. Subject complement. Subject, and when we talk about complement, it's giving us more information about the thing. That's complement. Now let's look at this example. The good news is that the past is JAMB exam. The good news is that the past is JAMB exam. And from that the past is JAMB exam is actually what? Our noun clause. Performing which function? Subject complement. And you should know that our subject in this sentence is what? The good news. And now for you to know that it is a subject complement, what is the good news in this sentence? The good news is that the past is what? Is JAMB exam. So that the past is JAMB exam is what? Is the good news. Can you now see? Vice versa. That's why it is what? It is a subject complement. What is the good good news. He passed his JAMB exam. Okay, he passed his JAMB exam is what? Is the good news. So you can see that it is what? It is the subject what? Complement. Very easy and very simple as that. Now let's move to what? Object complement. Let's move to what? Object complement. An object complement is when the noun clause follows the object in the sentence. When the noun clause follows the object, you know, in English you might have subject, verb, object, and if the noun clause follows this object immediately, it serves as what? As object complement. Now let's look at this example. The authority gave the students what is termed award of excellence. Award of excellence. The authority gave the students what is termed award of what? Excellence. And when you look at this sentence very well, the authority is our what? Is our subject. Gave is our verb. Then the student is our what? Our object. And what is termed award of excellence is our what? Is our noun clause. And you can see it is coming immediately after the what? After the object. It's coming immediately after the what? Object. Thereby performing the function of what? Object what? Object complement. Performing the function of what? Object what? Complement. That's it. The authority gave the student what is termed award of excellence. And notice what is also a subordinating what? Subordinating conjunction. It's also a what? Subordinating conjunction. Whereas making what is termed award of excellence a noun clause. Now let's move on to the next function, which is what? Complement of a preposition. Complement of a preposition. And this is when the noun clause comes immediately after a preposition. Comes immediately after a preposition. Look at this example. They are always grateful for whatever you gave them. They are always grateful for whatever you give them. Now look at this very well. They are always grateful for whatever you give them. And as I said, complement of a preposition is when the noun clause comes immediately after the preposition. And if you look at this sentence very well, for is our what? Is our preposition. And whatever you give them is now what? Is the noun clause. Is what? Is the noun clause. Because it starts with what? With a subordinating what? Conjunction. Whereas performing the function of what? Complement of a what? Preposition for. Performing the function of what? Complement of a preposition what? For. Now let's look at the last function before we move to the next type of subordinate clause, which is in apposition to a noun. In apposition to a noun. And what do we mean by in apposition to a noun? That is, a noun clause in apposition to a noun is when the noun clause and the noun refers to the same person or thing. That is what in apposition to a noun. That is when the noun clause and the noun refers to what? Same person or thing. You know, a noun can be a person, can be a thing. Now let's look at this example. The news that she was missing spread across the village. Spread across the village. The news that she was missing spread across what? The village. And when you look at this sentence very well, that she was missing is actually our what? Our noun clause. And I said before that it's in opposition to a noun. It's when the noun clause and the noun refers to the same person or thing. And look at news, the news. Let me say, look at news is our noun. And these are what? Our noun clause. And when you look at it very well, they are referring to what? To the same thing. For you to know it now, let me ask you, what is the news? The news is that she was missing. Then that she was missing, what is that she was missing? Is the news. Can you now see? It is what? In opposition to what? This noun clause is in opposition to what? To the news. We can say the news spread across the village. Right. But for you to give us more information, the news that she was missing spread across the what? Across the village. Those are the what? 6 functions of what? Of a noun clause. 6 functions of a noun clause. And don't forget, for you to know a noun clause, for you to be able to identify it wherever you see it. 1, it must start with what? A subordinating conjunction. And that noun clause must act as what? As either the subject, object, or what? Or complement. Now let's move on to the next type of what? Of subordinate clause, which is what? Relative clause. Relative what? Relative clause.